Hello, thank you for joining with me. We are in A Course in Miracles, Workbook for Students, Part 1 of the workbook, Lesson 166 for June 15th. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. All things are given you. God's trust in you is limitless. He knows His Son. He gives without exception, holding nothing back that can contribute to your happiness. And yet, unless your will is one with His gifts are not received. But what would make you think there is another will than His? Here is the paradox that underlies the making of the world. This world is not the will of God, and so it is not real. Yet those who think it real must still believe there is another will, and one which leads to opposite effects from those He wills. Impossible indeed, but every mind which looks upon the world and judges it as certain, solid, trustworthy, and true, believes in two creators, or in one Himself alone, but never in one God. The gifts of God are not acceptable to anyone who holds such strange beliefs. He must believe that to accept God's gifts, however evident they may become, however urgently he may be called to claim them as his own, it is to be pressed to treachery against himself. I'm going to repeat that sentence. He must believe that to accept God's gifts, however evident they may become, however urgently he may be called to claim them as his own, it is to be pressed to treachery against himself. He must deny their presence, contradict the truth, and suffer to preserve the world he made. Here is the only home he thinks he knows. Here is the only safety he believes that he can find. Without the world he made, is he an outcast, homeless and afraid. He does not realize that it is here he is afraid indeed, and homeless too, an outcast wandering so far from home, so long away. He does not realize he has forgotten where he came from, where he goes, and even who he really is. Yet, in his lonely, senseless wanderings, God's gifts go with him, all unknown to him. He cannot lose them, but he will not look at what is given him. He wanders on, aware of the futility he sees about him everywhere, perceiving how his little lot but dwindles as he goes ahead to nowhere. Still he wanders on in misery and poverty, alone though God is with him, and a treasure his so great that everything in the world, contains is valueless before its magnitude. I'm going to repeat that sentence. I'm sorry. Some of the sentences are so long, they kind of run together, and I lose my... I need to reread it, so I hope that's helpful to you. Still he wanders on in misery and poverty, alone though God is with him, and a treasure his so great that everything the world contains is valueless before its magnitude. Okay, I got it. I hope that makes sense to you. He seems a sorry figure, weary, worn, in threadbare clothing, and with feet that bleed a little from the rocky road he walks. No one but has identified with him, for everyone who comes here has pursued the path he follows, and has felt defeat and hopelessness as he is feeling them. Yet is he really tragic when you see that he is following the way he chose, and need but realize who walks with him, and open up his treasures to be free. Okay. So yet is he really tragic when you see that he is following the way he chose, and need but realize who walks with him and open up his treasures to be free. And that's a question. This is your chosen self, the one you made as a replacement for reality. This is the self you savagely defend against all reason, every evidence, and all the witnesses with proof to show this is not you. You heed them not. You go on your appointed way, with eyes cast down, lest you might catch a glimpse of truth, and be released from self-deception and set free. You cower fearfully lest you should feel Christ's touch upon your shoulder and perceive his gentle hand directing you to look upon your gifts. How could you then proclaim your poverty and exile? He would make you laugh at this perception of yourself. Where is self-pity then? And what becomes of all the tragedy you sought to make for him whom God intended only joy? Your ancient fear has come upon you now, and justice has caught up with you at last. Christ's hand has touched your shoulder, and you feel that you are not alone. You even think the miserable self you thought was you even think the miserable self you thought was you may not be your identity. Perhaps God's word is truer than your own. Perhaps his gifts to you are real. Perhaps he has not wholly been outwitted by your plan to keep his son in deep oblivion and go the way you chose without yourself, capital S. God's will does not oppose, it merely is. It is not God you have imprisoned in your plan to lose yourself. He does not know about a plan so alien to his will. There was a need he did not understand, to which he gave an answer. That is all. And you who have this answer given you have need no more of anything but this. Now do we live, for now we cannot die. The wish for death is answered, and the sight that looked upon it now has been replaced by vision which perceives that you are not what you pretend to be. One walks with you who gently answers all your fears with this one merciful reply. It is not so. He points to all the gifts you have each time the thought of poverty oppresses you, and speaks of his companionship when you perceive yourself as lonely and afraid. Yet he reminds you still of one thing more you had forgotten. For his touch on you has made you like himself, capital H. We're going to look at footnote 318. Most of this lesson consists of an extended image in which you see yourself as a homeless person, wandering alone and far from home. Christ wants to touch you on the shoulder, show you that you are not alone, and point out to you all the gifts God has given you, to prove that your image of yourself is not true. You fear this, for you are attached to the image, but you eventually accept Christ's touch, which overturns your belief that you are homeless and alone, and which asks that you become the giver of his touch to those who still walk the lonely road you have escaped. The gifts you have are not for you alone. What he has come to offer you, you now must learn to give. This is the lesson that his giving holds, for he has saved you from the solitude you sought to make in which to hide from God. He has reminded you of all the gifts that God has given you. He speaks as well of what becomes your will when you accept these gifts and recognize they are your own. The gifts are yours, entrusted to your care to give to all who chose the lonely road you have escaped. They do not understand, but they pursue their wishes. It is you who teach them now, for you have learned of Christ there is another way for them to walk. Teach them by showing them the happiness that comes to those who feel the touch of Christ and recognize God's gifts. Let sorrow not tempt you to be unfaithful to your trust. Your sighs now betray the hopes of those who look to you for their release. Your tears are theirs. If you are sick, you but withhold their healing. What you fear but teaches them their fears are justified. Your hand becomes the giver of Christ's touch. Your change of mind becomes the proof that who accepts God's gifts can never suffer anything. You are entrusted with the world's release from pain. Betray it not. Become the living proof of what Christ's touch can offer everyone. God has entrusted all his gifts to you. Be witness in your happiness to how transformed the mind becomes, which chooses to accept his gifts and feel the touch of Christ. Such is your mission now, for God entrusts the giving of his gifts to all who have received them. He has shared his joy with you, and now you go to share it with the world. Thank you for joining with me. We are on lesson 166. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. And I'm going to read the commentary by Alan Watson and Robert Perry. The purpose of this lesson is to give the gifts of God to those who still walk the lonely road you are escaping, to demonstrate through your happiness what it means to receive the gifts of God. So 5 minutes meditation, ideally 30 or more. My suggestion is spend some time feeling the touch of Christ. You have made a false self that is akin to a mentally ill homeless person. As a result, you wander about feeling alone and impoverished. How many of us have felt that without physically being homeless, but have felt alone and impoverished? I know I have. Of course, I would have to feel that to be open to A Course in Miracles. I believe. Yeah, I was searching for God my entire life. So, in your meditation, let Christ tap you on the shoulder and give you the awareness that you are not alone and you are not impoverished. Experience the joy that comes from feeling his touch. This will prepare you for a day in which your hand becomes the giver of Christ's touch, in which you become the reminder to the homeless people around you that they are not alone and that they are not impoverished. You do this primarily by demonstrating the joy you have received from Christ. Be witness in your happiness to how transformed the mind becomes, which chooses to accept his gifts and feel the touch of Christ. So hourly remembrance, 1 or 2 minutes as the hour strikes. Reduce the time if circumstances do not permit. Repeat the idea and try to feel the touch of Christ. Then thank God for the gifts he placed in your hands in the past hour and ask him how he would have you give these gifts in the coming hour. Whenever you are tempted to be sorrowful, fearful, tearful, or sick, turn to this lesson. Repeat the idea in order to dispel these feelings, for they betray your trust, your mission. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. Whenever you are afraid, hear Christ reply, "It is not so." When you feel poor, let him point out his gifts to you. When you feel lonely, let him speak of his companionship. Commentary by Alan Watson. This lesson carries on the general tone of the previous one, attempting to persuade us to keep moving forward past the illusion of ourselves we have been content to live with. It opens with the idea that God trusts us so much, He has given everything to us, everything. He knows His Son, and just because He knows us, He gives us everything without exception. His trust in us is limitless. We doubt our own certainty, but God's we can depend on. I trust God's trust in me. What we fear is that trusting God is treachery to ourselves. We are attached to this world we made. To admit it is not real is to betray myself. If I have progressed beyond the point of believing that I can create like God, that I can make a world that is perfect somehow, I at least want to cling to the notion that I can unmake what God made, that I can destroy the world and shatter its perfection. To be told my actions, my sins, my denials, my doubts, and all their like are without effect is demeaning to my ego self. So I contradict the truth of heaven to preserve what I have made. There is a part in each of us that wants to be a tragic figure, like some hero or heroine in an opera. We want to be able to say, "Behold how nobly I withstand the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune." We think, all unconsciously, that without the outrageous fortune, our nobility would be lost. When I listen to my ego, this is how I want to see myself. Such a tragic figure, poor thing, so weary and worn. Look at his threadbare clothing. How he must have been deprived. And his feet, oh poor thing, they are bleeding. We can all identify with this figure. Everyone who comes here to this world has pursued the path he follows and has felt defeat and hopelessness as he is feeling them. You know what this is talking about. You've been there. Maybe you are there now. You know what defeat and hopelessness means. You felt it too. Yet is he really tragic when you see that he is following the way he chose and need but realize who walks with him and open up his treasures to be free. Is he, the tragic hero who is you and me, really tragic, or is he just foolish? Is he making a silly mistake? When you see that he is choosing his path and could choose otherwise, can you consider his suffering tragic? This is your chosen self, the one you made as a replacement for reality. This, folks, is the ego self we have chosen to be. It's how we've seen ourselves. This is the self we are defending. This is the person we have become. And we resist all the evidence and witnesses that prove that this is not us. Jesus calls on us to drop the victim act and recognize that I am not a victim of the world I see. The victim. That I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience, and I decide upon the goal I would achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. That's in the text, chapter 21. You see yourself as this tragic figure, but Jesus' response is, Christ would make you laugh at this perception of yourself. I'd like to meditate on that a while. Jesus wants to make me laugh. Jesus is a frustrated comedian. Well, maybe not frustrated. Look at what he accomplishes through Marianne Williamson. He wants us to laugh at our egos. He wants me to see the humor of my position, pleading tragedy when I've deliberately chosen to be what I am. Where is self-pity then, and what becomes of all the tragedy you sought to make for him whom God intended only joy? The self-pity and the tragedy just disappear. That's what happens. When you laugh at the sorry figure of the ego, the tragedy vanishes. The next paragraph describes very well where some of us are right now, just starting to realize that we are not the ego. This lesson is written on many levels, addressing first, as we've seen, the person hiding in the ego illusion of tragedy. Then, in these next sentences, the person who has begun to realize that the miserable ego is not his true identity. And finally, in paragraph 11 on, the person who has clearly seen and accepted that you are not what you pretend to be. In paragraph 9, we see the person in the middle feeling torn, afraid, almost under attack by God, whom he has habitually avoided all his life. Let's listen in to our responses as Jesus tries to make us laugh and see alongside it the humorous truth. First, we sense the presence of God, whom we have been hiding from. Your ancient fear has come upon you now, and justice has caught up with you at last. Our reaction: oh, rats, it's God, now I'm going to get it. Jesus: it's silly to be afraid of God, silly to think he is your enemy and wants to hurt you. What a laughable idea to be afraid of God. The lesson: Christ's hand touched your shoulder. Our reaction: what was that really weird feeling? Oh, Christ. Was it Christ? Is that his voice in my mind? I must be losing it. Jesus: it is your brother and he wants to bring you home. How foolish to fear him. The lesson: and you feel that you are not alone. Our reaction: and I'm not sure I like the idea of someone always with me looking over my shoulder. Jesus: what a funny reaction. I am your comforter and teacher, not your judge. It's silly to think you prefer being alone. The lesson: you even think the miserable self you thought was you may not be your identity. Perhaps God's word is truer than your own. Our reaction: I can't believe I've started to doubt these things I've believed all my life. I must be insane. Jesus: on the other hand, who has more chance of being right, you or God? Be real. The lesson: perhaps his gifts to you are real. Our reaction: yeah, and maybe it's just my imagination. Jesus: but what if they really are real, these gifts? Isn't it foolish not to find out? The lesson: perhaps he has not wholly been outwitted by your plan to keep his son in deep oblivion and go the way you chose without yourself. Our reaction: yeah, maybe he has. Maybe I've screwed it up so bad that even God can't fix it. Jesus: now that's truly funny. You outwitting God? Right, sure, that's brilliant thinking. God decides he wants something, and you are going to keep it from happening? Our reaction: but if I didn't outwit him, then I must still be what he had made me be. Okay, let me repeat that. Then I must still be what he made me to be. I'm not sure I want to give up believing in what I've always thought I am. I feel threatened. Jesus: so, okay. Hold on to the picture of yourself you've always had. I'm sure you've really enjoyed being you that way, right? God isn't fighting it. The lesson: God's will does not oppose, it merely is. You're not fighting with God, and he is not fighting with you. He doesn't fight, he doesn't oppose, he merely is. What you are fighting, and this is a fall down, bust a gut funny, is reality itself. Thinking you are separate from God is about as smart as a drop of water deciding it's not in the ocean anymore. It's like a lion deciding it wants to be a mouse. You're trying to be what you are not. That's what causes all the strain, when it should cause nothing but laughter. The fight is all on your side against an imagined enemy. You are the answer to all your own questions. There is nothing to be afraid of here. The truth about yourself is wonderful, not frightening. In the remainder of the lesson, Jesus talks of 3 things we need to know. First, all the gifts that God has given us, that is, the real self that we are, whole, healed, and abundant. Second, his presence with us, our companion on the journey. And third, that the gifts we have are made for giving away. We have a purpose here to give these gifts to all who chose the lonely road you have escaped. In a sense, those are the three main thrusts of A Course in Miracles. First, learning the true nature of self, capital S, the holiness and joy of our own being. Second, and equally important until we leave this world, is the sure knowledge of His companionship on the way, the help we need to make it through. And finally, that the nature we have realized is that of giver and lover. To know we have the gift, we must give it. We must teach the world by showing it. The happiness that comes to those who feel the touch of Christ. Our mission is just that, to be happy. Your change of mind becomes the proof that who accepts God's gifts can never suffer anything. We are here to become the living proof of what Christ's touch can offer everyone. Be witness in your happiness to how transformed the mind becomes which chooses to accept His gifts and feel the touch of Christ. Such is your mission now. Recognize His gifts, feel His touch, and share His gifts with the world through our happiness, not through beating people over the head with them. Those are the 3 stages of moving forward. Another way to put it, drop the victim act and take responsibility as the source of your life. Choose heaven instead of hell. Ask your companion for his help. And be the proof of heaven's reality by your radiant joy and refusal to suffer anything. Recognize His gifts, feel His touch, and share His gifts with the world through our happiness. Thank you so much for joining with me. Lesson 166. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. I love you.